Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Revolution 250 podcast. I am Bob Allison. I chair the Rev 250 Advisory Group. We are a consortium of about 75 organizations in Massachusetts planning, reenactments, commemorations of the beginnings of American independence. I also am a faculty member at Suffolk University. And our guest today is Jeff Pearlman. And Jeff Pearlman is city historian in Revere, as well as an adjunct faculty member at Salem State. And the really exciting thing is that May of 2025 will be the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. And Revere, Chelsea, East Boston, where all of this happened, are planning commemorations. And Jeff is the guy who knows what happened at Chelsea Creek and why it's important. So Jeff, how come the Battle of Chelsea Creek is something we should remember, and why has it been forgotten? I know those are two big questions.
That's a good question, Bob. First of all, thank you for having me. And I want to just express my thanks to Revolution 250 and to everybody associated with the organization. The Battle of Chelsea Creek is more than just a cattle raid, as we're going to find out. The reason why in my opinion, it hasn't been recognized as an important battle is for a number of reasons. Number one, none of the leaders of the Patriots, Colonel Stark, General Putnam, and others, never left any written records about the battle. And also because it was sandwiched in between Lexington and Concord in April of 1775 and the Battle of Bunker Hill in June of 1775, it kind of gets erased. But this morning I'm going to try to unerase, if that's such a word, this mistake in history and educate people about how important this battle is by giving some background, by giving the major events of the battle, and most importantly, the significance of the Battle of Chelsea Creek.
So, what happened in May of 1775?
Okay, let me start with a little background, first of all. In the 17th century, because of the competition between the colonies and Britain, the Navigation Acts were passed, but they weren't strictly enforced. Called salutary neglect, it let the colonies get away with trading without paying tariffs and using their own ships instead of British ships and their own crew. And British started to crack down on that and began to enforce it. Between 1754 and 1761, French and Indian War left the British Treasury deficient, which meant that they had to recoup their resources, their money. And so the Navigation Acts now being strictly enforced, taxes were levied upon the colonists, such as the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Act, and so many others. In 1764, things got kind of hot in the colonies, fed up with the fact that we were paying taxes without being represented. A committee of safety was formed to oppose the British acts. The committee of safety was led by people such as Artemus Ward and Joseph Warren and John Hancock. In 1774, the Boston Tea Party, after the Boston Tea Party took place, to punish the people of Boston, the coercive or intolerable acts were passed, which meant that General Gage was sent to Boston to be the military governor. But more importantly, one of those intolerable acts was that the port of Boston would be closed to all commercial shipping until the tea was paid for. Orders were given in May of 1775 by the Committee of Safety when they found that the British were plundering our coasts and taking cattle and other animals and other livestock for fresh meat. I'd like to read to you the order given by the Provincial Congress of Massachusetts Committee of Safety on May 14th, 1775. Resolved, as the opinion of this committee, that all the livestock be taken from Noddle's Island, Hog Island, Snake Island, and from that part of Chelsea near the seacoast, and be driven back, and the execution of the business be committed by the Committee of Correspondence and Selectmen of the towns of Medford, Malden, Chelsea, and Lynn. They be supplied with such a number of men as they shall need from the regiment now in Medford. A week later, on May 21st, 1775, an event took place on the South Shore, which would affect the Battle of Chelsea Creek. It's pretty well unknown, but it was a battle called the Battle of Grape Island. On May 21st, Elijah Levitt was giving hay to the British, and the colonists from Weymouth fired upon the British troops. They took boats to the islands and drove the British away. Abigail Adams, she wrote to her husband, quote, "You inquire of me who are at the engagement at Grape Island. I may say with truth that all of Weymouth, Braintree, and Hingham who were able to bear arms, and hundreds from other towns within 30 or 40 miles of Weymouth. Both your brothers were there," she wrote. "Your younger brother, with his company, who gained honor that day, he was one of the first to venture on board a schooner to land upon that island."
So we have the militia then from Hingham, Weymouth, Braintree going to attack this British party on Grape Island. That's
1 week before the Battle of Chelsea Creek took place.
Yeah,
so there was a precedent, indeed. Now, I want to mention a gentleman by the name of Henry Howell Williams. Henry Howell Williams was the owner of the Williams Farm in Chelsea, and he lived on Noddle's Island and sold livestock to the British. In other words, he was a Tory.
Yeah. He had a very nice house in the area of Maverick Square.
Exactly. He was friendly with the judges and the British in Boston, and the cattle on Hog Island was owned by Oliver Wendell of Kingston. He was an absentee landlord who was loyal also to the British. In a message from General Gage to Admiral Graves on May 25th, 2 days before the battle, I have this moment of received information that the rebels intend this night to destroy and carry off the stock at Noddle's Island. For what reason? Because the owners, having sold them for the king's use, I therefore give you this intelligence, that you may please to order the guard boats to be particularly attentive to take such other measures as you may think necessary for this night.
So Gage finds out that there's this raid in the offing, and he tells Admiral Graves, the guy who's in charge of all of the ships and the boats in the harbor.
Exactly.
Doesn't Graves also have a warehouse on Noddle's Island where he's stockpiling stuff?
Admiral Graves.
Yeah.
Yes, he and Howell were in cahoots. Absolutely.
In cahoots, yeah.
Now, preparation for the battle. I want to mention some of the major troops that were there. Colonel John Stark, who in my opinion was the hero of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. He was from New Hampshire, and with around 300 men, he began his march to Chelsea from Medford. Colonel John Nixon, he began his march from Cambridge. He met Stark in Medford, and together they would march to Chelsea. And the Chelsea Company, which we're very proud of, by the way, was under the command of a Colonel Samuel Gerish and Samuel Sprague, a man who, by the way, was in his 60s, and I'm proud to say that he is buried in the Rumney Marsh burial ground in Revere. Absolutely. And when I give tours of that burial ground, I point out his grave among others. Also,
the Rumney Marsh burying ground is really a tremendous gem in this area, where you have people like Sprague and other patriots from the Revolution, as well as from the Civil War.
Correct. Also in the Chelsea Company was a fellow with a familiar last name, Army Baldwin. Baldwin is the father of American civil engineering, but he's more well known as the man who popularized the Baldwin apple.
Right.
He was a Renaissance man, Baldwin, and I'll talk about him a little later because he would be one who would row out to the Diana, which was a British schooner, and burned the ship to the ground. The Chelsea Company, they were familiar with the topography of the area. On the early morning of May 27th, 1775, the armies met in a meeting house in Chelsea. That is now a counseling center on Beach Street. It was a Masonic temple at one time.
Is it the same building, Jeff?
Pardon?
Is it the same building where they met?
The same building, absolutely.
Really?
Yep. They met there, had a small breakfast, and after a meal, they began their trip to Sales Farm. John Sales was a man who owned a huge farm, which today is the Beachmont section of Revere. And so this is where they set out on the morning of May 27th to begin their attempts to evacuate livestock from the islands. They had a short route from the meeting house. They went up Winthrop Avenue, and there was nothing really hindering their advance except some fences. They arrived at the Sales Farm around 10 a.m. that morning. The battle.
So Sales Farm, they have to cross over the marsh, don't they, to get to?
Yes, they did.
Noddle's Island?
Yes, they did. The battle itself would take place right after the roundup. And the roundup begins around 10 o'clock that morning. Crossing to Hog Island, which is today Orient Heights, the Provincials removed many cows and sheep and brought them back to the mainland, brought them back to Sales Farm. A small detachment then crossed over, maybe about 30 troops, crossed over to Hog Island, to Noddle's Island, East Boston, to round up the cattle owned by Henry Howell Williams. Now, in their enthusiasm, and this is the mistake that the 30 Provincials made on Noddle's Island, they started to burn haystacks. They even burned Henry Howell Williams's house. This was seen by the smoke was seen by the British at Boston Harbor, especially aboard the Preston, which was anchored there. And it was reported that there were 600 men in total from Massachusetts and New Hampshire, as I mentioned, and only 30 went over to Noddle's Island. Along with the haystacks, Williams' house was set ablaze, 15 horses were removed, and only a few cattle. British Admiral Samuel Graves signaled for the schooner Diana to sail into Chelsea Creek. Many cannon were on the Diana. Graves also ordered several barges with Marines as well. While this was going on, there was fierce fighting between the British troops that were on Noddle's Island with some of the 30 men who, thank goodness, eventually escaped back to Hog Island and then back to Sales Farm. But as the Diana was sailing down Chelsea Creek, there was some fighting going on between the British and the Provincials right on Noddle's Island. Graves also ordered several barges with Marines. Graves's nephew, Thomas Graves, was in charge of the Diana. He was warned by his uncle of the shifting tides in the river. The Diana had 4 6-pound cannon and 12 swivels and smaller guns that were maneuverable. The battle. The Provincials returned the fire from the ditches in the low ground into which they dropped, often in mud and water up to their knees. One of the men, Amos Farnsworth, actually kept a diary. These are his words as he knelt in the ditch. We crossed Crooked Creek, and about 15 of us squared down in a ditch on the marsh, stood our ground, and there came a company of regulars on the march on the other side of the river and the schooner. And we had hot fire until the regulars retreated, but not understanding, the bullets flew very thick, but there was not a man of us killed. End quote. The retreat gave the Provincials time to leave Hog Island for the Sales Farm. While the colonials protected themselves in ditches, sometimes up to their necks in water, sailors and Marines on the barges attempted to drive them back, continuing to exert every effort in towing and controlling the direction of the schooner and sloop against the wind and tide currents in the narrow confines of Chelsea Creek. By dusk, the Diana became grounded. Now it was getting to be dark. At this time, around 8, 9 o'clock, General Israel Putnam from Connecticut began to arrive. After much of the battle was already over, and I want to stress that's when General Putnam arrived, around 9 o'clock that night. I mean, the battle was almost 12 hours old at that time. The British wolves were actually on the run, and the arrival of General Putnam increased the number of hounds yelping at the heels of the scurrying pack. Putnam arrived with some 200 men, 2 cannon, and at once assumed command due to his rank. During this time, the battle was severe. Every moment, Provincials were arriving at Winnisimmett, assisting in the attack. The firing upon the Provincials by the schooner did no particular damage at all. Putnam's report to the committee was as follows. I love the optimism. Quote, I wish we could have something of this kind to do every day. It would teach our men how little danger there is from cannonballs, for though they sent a great many at us, nobody has been hurt by them. I would that Gage and his troops were within our reach, but we would be like hornets about their ears as little birds follow and tease the eagle in his flight. We would every day continue to make them uneasy. That was General Putnam's words.
Isn't there a story about Putnam wading out into the water and taunting the Diana?
Yes, he actually verbally gave a warning, promising that if they surrender, they will receive aid and they will receive comfort. And the answer was a cannon shot fired by the Diana. In other words, damn you. You know. That's exactly right. We will give you a refuge, and the British turned that down. The most serious wound reported was of a Townsend, Massachusetts man belonging to Asa Farnsworth's company. A bullet went through his mouth, entered one cheek, and out the other. It was Joseph Warren, later that night, who gave the orders to burn the Diana. As I mentioned, Loami Baldwin and 12 others began to row out after midnight, and before burning the ship, they took everything of value. Baldwin, the father of civil engineering, was well selected for this work. He was a major in the Chelsea Company, along with Sam Pratt, who carried hay from the nearby farm and did the Chelsea Company proud. This happened around midnight. The Diana had been grounded for quite a while. Most of the British troops had abandoned the Diana and got on barges that were there to take them away. And by the way, among the valuable treasures that were taken from the Diana were a cannon that was later used at Bunker Hill. Putnam was the ranking officer present. By rules, he was entitled to recognition as such. However, he did not participate in the raid on Hog nor Noddle's Island, nor in the pitched battle there. The real leader, in my opinion, was Colonel John Stark from New Hampshire. By the way, it was Colonel John Stark who first uttered the words, live free or die, which, of course, is the motto of New Hampshire today and is on their license plates. 3 weeks later, Stark led troops who repulsed the British twice at Bunker Hill. He was at Bunker Hill. In 1776, he participated at the Battle of Trenton, and in 1777 was the hero at Bennington, which led to the British surrender at Saratoga. He learned by his experience in the French and Indian War that it's better to separate the enemy from his supplies. He was 150 years ahead of his time. Right. Strategy is quoted. First to say, live free or die, as I mentioned. Colonel John Nixon, a native of Sudbury, led troops at Lexington and Concord, fought at Bunker Hill, like Stark, participated in company in New York, New Jersey in 1776, and he led troops at Harlem Heights, and later at Saratoga. He eventually received the rank of Brigadier General. That's John Nixon. According to Benjamin Shurtleff, the Patriots brought to the mainland from the islands 6 horses, 27 horned cattle, and 411 sheep. Casualties, these are estimates. British losses, somewhere killed and wounded between 35 and 60. Provincials, 2 wounded, none killed. Finally, the importance and significance of the Battle of Chelsea Creek. First, excluding the capture of Fort Ticonderoga on May 10th by Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, the Battle of Chelsea Creek can be called the second major engagement of the American Revolution. 2, it was the first armed and offensive military engagement deliberately entered upon by Massachusetts citizens. Third, here was the first capture and destruction of a British vessel during the war. Fourth, for the first time, the colonies united against the common enemy, Stark coming down from New Hampshire, Nixon from Massachusetts, and Putnam coming up from Connecticut. Fifth, it was the first battle in American history where cannon was used. The Battle of Chelsea Creek was more than just a raid on cattle, and we should be proud that between Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill, we witnessed history in our own backyard. Today, just west of the skating rink on Broadway, Chelsea, is a monument commemorating the bravery and patriotism of the heroes from the Battle of Chelsea Creek. A number of years ago, several of us got together and I was appointed to write what is on that stone. If you travel down Broadway Revere under the bridge into Chelsea, just next to the Cronin skating rink are two flags with a monument, and on that monument is the bronze plaque briefly describing the events that I told you about, the Battle of Chelsea Creek.
Jeff, just so we can clarify this, there's a city of Chelsea today. At the time we're talking about, what's now the city of Revere was part of Chelsea. So
let me explain that to you. Of course, Revere was originally known as Rumney Marsh, and then Chelsea was formed, and Chelsea in 1739 was not only Chelsea but also Revere and Winthrop. And we remained a part of Chelsea from 1739 to 1846. So when you're talking about any events between 1739 and 1846 that happened in Revere or Winthrop, it's Chelsea. In 1846, this part of Chelsea, Revere, began to become populated, and we changed once again our name to North Chelsea. So from 1846 to 1871, we were the town of North Chelsea. I tell my students that if they're looking for veterans who fought in the Civil War from Revere, don't look under Revere, look under North Chelsea. In 1871, as the population began to mushroom, we changed our name again to Revere, named, of course, after the patriot Paul Revere. And from 1871 to 1915, we were the town of Revere. And then in 1915, we elected our first mayor, Andrew Burns, and we became the city of Revere. So we have been the city of Revere since 1915. So that's a little bit of a timeline. Also, this city of Chelsea just observed its 400th anniversary, and on that day, Revere participated in the parade as North Chelsea. That is, they remember this connection between these two cities. Exactly. By the way, Winthrop broke off not long after Chelsea. Part of Chelsea became North Chelsea. I think around 1852, Winthrop broke away and, of course, named their town after the first governor of Massachusetts.
And there was a Winthrop who lived in Winthrop, wasn't there? Dean Winthrop.
Yeah, there's a Dean Winthrop house. And every year, by the way, members of the Dean Winthrop Society come to the Rumney Marsh Cemetery and lay flowers at the grave of Dean Winthrop. Okay. Dean Winthrop, one of the sons of John Winthrop, is also one of the famous people buried at the Rumney Marsh burial ground. By the way, Bob, I just found out the other day that I'm going to be giving, and this is for anybody who's interested, I'm going to be giving a historical tour of the Rumney Marsh Cemetery on November 17th. That's a Sunday at 2 o'clock. That's November 17th at 2 o'clock. I'm going to be giving a tour of the Rumney Marsh Cemetery. I'm going to be pointing out not only the graves of the veterans that are buried there from the Revolutionary War up to the Civil War, but I'm also going to talk about Samuel Sprague. I'm going to talk about Dean Winthrop. I'm going to talk about Reverend Phillips Payson, another extraordinary man who was a minister here in Chelsea and who fought for religious freedom. As a matter of fact, something I'm very proud of, despite being a clergyman, he represented Chelsea at the Constitutional Convention to ratify the Constitution of Boston, and he spoke out against any religious qualification for one to run for public office.
Interesting, very interesting. And for those who can't join Jeff Pearlman on November 17th at the Rumney Marsh Burying Ground, we'll put a link so people can contact you, because a tour with you of the Rumney Marsh Burying Ground is really eye-opening, really an inspiration.
Well, my email is simply jpearlman@salemstate.edu.
Okay, J. Pearlman at salemstate.edu.
Right, that's Pearlman.
M-A.
Some of my relatives spell it Perl, but I tell them we had more money so we could afford the A. But anyway, that's a personal joke. Anyway, I'd like to sum up, if I can, by just reviewing and giving you a timeline of what I talked about today to make things, again, pretty organized. At midnight, Stark's troops marched from Medford to Chelsea. Nixon's troops began to march from Cambridge to Chelsea. At 6 a.m., with Sprague's men, they met at the church on Beach Street for a small breakfast. At 8 a.m., they began their march to Sales Farm, which is today the Beachmont section of Revere. At 10 a.m., Stark's troops began to remove livestock from Hog Island, Orient Heights, over to the Sales Farm. At 11 a.m., American troops crossed to Noddle's Island, East Boston, to remove livestock from that island. 1 o'clock, British observed smoke coming from Noddle's Island and ordered the Diana to sail down Chelsea Creek. From 3 o'clock to 6 p.m. on May 27th, 1775, heavy fighting went on between American troops and British Marines aboard the Diana. At 6 o'clock, the Diana was trapped in mud. Graves ignored the warnings from his uncle. Thomas ignored the orders from Samuel Graves about the tide and the time, and so it was stuck in the mud. At 9 o'clock, American reinforcements under the command of Israel Putnam arrived up from Connecticut. And then, once the fighting was over at midnight, the Diana was abandoned, and several colonists rowed out to the ship and set it ablaze. By the way, Stark and his men remained in Chelsea the next day as well, just to make sure that things were no longer easily gotten to by the British, any livestock or anything like that. So that, to me, is a summary of the entire Battle of Chelsea Creek. I hope that I did today was, as you asked at the beginning of the podcast, why is the Battle of Chelsea Creek so important? And indeed, as I mentioned, it was more than a cattle raid. It was the first naval engagement in American history.
Time we didn't have a navy, too.
Exactly.
And another piece too is don't they take the mast of the Diana and make that the flagpole on Prospect Hill?
That's exactly right. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
Yeah, I guess Jonathan's been looking at the tide charts. He says the high tide was at 9:40 a.m., which means wasn't it an unusually high tide? It was like king. Well, today we call it king tide. So it means Graves could get the Diana further up because the water was higher, but then of course the water becomes lower at low tide. Yeah,
and it's funny that his uncle knew that, and others knew that, and he just ignored his uncle. By the way, despite this error in judgment, Thomas Graves, I believe, was promoted to vice admiral. That's. But then again, Bob, we forget that back in the 18th century, merit didn't count. It was who you knew or who you were related to. That's why salutary neglect occurred. And that's why during the wars for empire between France and Britain, which took place from 1689 into the 18th century, they couldn't enforce those navigation acts.
The Earl of Sandwich, who was the minister, the Lord of the Admiralty, actually had his mistress as one of his assistants in the Admiralty. And yeah, and Samuel, it helps to have your uncle as the admiral in this case.
Thank goodness for corruption and graft. Or we may not have won the war,
That's very true, very true. And then Graves and Gage really hated each other. And
wasn't Thomas Gage married to a colonial woman? Wasn't she?
He was. Oh yeah, Margaret
Yeah.
Temple. Yeah. And,
Okay.
Yeah. He spent a lot of time in New York. So did Henry Clinton, by the way. Clinton's father had been governor of New York back in the 1740s and 50s. Right. So they part of the empire.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't General Gage get a bad rap in all of this?
I think he does.
He wasn't so much sympathetic to the colonists, but he wasn't a rogue either.
No, he wasn't. And he's trying to figure out, his job is to keep Massachusetts as part of the empire. And how do you do that? And he's sent basically with an army to do this. And he realized an army is not the best tool to win people's hearts and minds. So he's trying to disarm these people, which makes a lot of sense. And and then, of course, everyone in Britain is saying, well, I could have done better, which is why they send 3 generals to replace him. Howe, Clinton, and Burgoyne all go along. And they think this will be really easy. They arrive in April and discover, but when they arrive, the town's surrounded now by 20,000 militiamen.
And of course, after March of 1776, everything shifted to New York, and we know what happened to Burgoyne and his army coming down from.
Yeah. Someone said Burgoyne looked at a map and thought, with a hop, skip, and a jump, you could cross from Canada to New York. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, what hurt Burgoyne also was the fact that he had women with him. He had all kinds of wagons with him. I mean, he really got bogged down. He thought he would make it to Albany in no time at all. I know. Yeah. He really misread things. And again, Guy Carleton, who was the Governor General of Canada and also an officer, in 1775 had proposed a similar expedition. The British said no, and then in 1777, or 1776, Burgoyne arrives with the orders to do what Carleton had proposed doing the previous year. And you have these personalities then, and these other things that prevent the British from. You and I could have done this very easily, I think, if we were in charge. The other thing, John Viscount Pitt was also in Boston during the Battle of Chelsea Creek.
The other big mistake that was made in that attempt to get to Albany was that General Howe, who was the commander, he decided not even to attempt to go to Albany. He wanted to chase George Washington around. Yeah.
He goes to Philadelphia. And, one of a British diarist writes how they don't know where Howe is. He and his men got onto these transports, left New York, and no one knew where they were going. Washington didn't know, nor did anyone else. That someone said that Howe has left and taken the war with him. Where he's going, we know not where. And so Burgoyne's coming down the Hudson, expecting that he's going to meet up with Howe's forces, and Howe's forces have taken off.
Exactly. It was a disaster before it began.
Yeah. So John Viscount Pitt was the son of William Pitt, the former prime minister. I guess then the brother of the Pitt the Younger, who becomes prime minister. Yes. So you have a lot of interesting folks here involved at the time of the Battle of Chelsea Creek as they're trying to hold on to this area. So we've been talking with Jeff Pearlman, who is the city historian for the city of Revere, also an adjunct faculty professor at Salem State, and as we now know, the real authority on what happened in May. And so Jeff, we've been working on plans to do things next May to commemorate this battle that has been forgotten. You want to say anything more about what you hope will happen to get people to remember this?
Well, it's wonderful that we're going to have a reenactment and tours maybe by boat or by trolley along some of the area where the battle took place. One of the areas that I suggested would be the former Slade's Tidewater Mill on Chelsea Creek, just up the Revere Beach Parkway from the skating rink. And there you can get a viewpoint of where the Diana pretty much sailed down and caught on fire. By the way, it was not far from Slade's Mill where excavations had been going on to try to find any remnants at all of the Diana, any burnt wood. But as far as I know, nothing has ever been found after all these years of the Diana.
Oh, one of our, no, go on.
Other ideas would be, to have livestock
Yeah.
there, the recapture of the livestock.
Yeah. One of our East Boston historians says that we shouldn't call it the Battle of Chelsea Creek because the waterway wasn't known as Chelsea Creek at the time. Now, you would be more of an authority on this than I am. What did they call this particular waterway in 1775?
I'm not quite sure about that. I've always thought about it as Chelsea Creek or Chelsea or the Chelsea River.
Right.
I have never heard any other name of that particular body of water. But it's very difficult unless you have old maps. It's definitely very difficult now with Revere Beach Parkway and all the buildings there to understand how deep Chelsea Creek was and how it was a major tributary from Boston. Into Chelsea.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's where oil tankers are, and now it's really a big industrial waterway. And just thinking about it then as this pastoral area, it's really helps us. It forces us to reimagine things as we look at this waterway. And I know that tremendous archaeological work that was done. You can see what was once where Laramie Baldwin and Farnsworth described going into this ditch. You can actually see it's been filled in, but it is lower than the surrounding area, in the area between Noddle's Island and Hog Island.
The other day on my way to the airport, we passed an area near Bennington Street, near Suffolk Downs, and supposedly that was part of Chelsea Creek at that time.
There is that waterway in the middle of Suffolk now.
As it went into Orient Heights and eventually East Boston, Hog Island, and Noddle's Island, as they were called in those days. So, I mean, it's very, very difficult. I have a problem, unless I look at maps, visualizing what it looked like in 1775.
Fascinating. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us and talking about Chelsea Creek.
Bob, it was my pleasure, and as an educator, I just hope that what we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so has helped people understand the importance of the battle, the significance of the battle, and it might make people want to actually visit Chelsea along the Rumney Marsh Cemetery and see the actual places and the graves of some of these extraordinary men who participated. Excuse me, who participated in this important battle.
Yes, as well as in East Boston at there's an urban wild off Condor Street where they do have a memorial to Chelsea Creek with a map. So all of these places, Revere, East Boston, Chelsea, really are excited about working together to commemorate this event. And so, you've helped us to understand it. So thank you, Jeff.
And once again, if they want to get in touch with me about about anything, really, not just about the cemetery tour, it's J. Pearlman.
J. Pearlman at salem.edu. Thank you so much, Jeff. And I want to thank Jonathan Lane, our producer, the man behind the curtain, as well as our listeners around the world who tune in regularly. And thank you for doing so. And if you're in one of these places, or if you want some of our Revolution 250 swag, or want to know more about Rev 250, send Jonathan Lane an email. It's jlane@revolution250, revolution250.org. And this week, let's thank our friends in Leominster, Lowell, here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Wilson, North Carolina, Amman, Jordan, and Morristown, New Jersey, and all places between and beyond. Thanks for joining us. Now we'll be piped out on the road to Boston.